It is, I guess, now almost 1 o'clock. We're getting close, but Wednesday, May 6th, and we're excited to have Mr. Parke Muth joining us today to talk about the funding behind college admission and kind of how COVID is going to affect college budgets and what that means for admission and how that can affect your child. I'm Margaret Beaudenay. I think I've met some of you, if not most of you. I'm the Managing Director of College Solutions. I manage the Mid-Atlantic region of College Solutions and work with Larry Dannenberg. Larry is the owner and CEO of College Solutions. Larry, you can wave or, do a dance or something. There we go. And we are glad to have Larry with us. He's going to be interviewing Parke Muth. Parke worked at the University of Virginia when I worked there, and he and I had a lot of fun. Parke was the Associate Dean of International Admission when he was at Virginia for many, many years. He was also a professor of creative writing, so he is an astute communicator and is also very, very honest with his opinions. So I think you'll enjoy hearing what he has to say about admission. He also runs his own admission consulting firm now. So with that, I'll let Larry and Parke take it away.
Thank you, Margaret. We do this weekly, so if you're interested in COVID topics, let us know what you want to know about college admissions. If you have a question, at the bottom of the screen, there's a chat box. If you put in your questions, we will do our best to answer them by the end of the session. So with that, Parke, there's a lot of things that are going on in the world. One of the things is budgets are getting impacted due to COVID-19. How is that likely to impact college admissions at state and private schools?
So that's a really good question. It's a really big question. And my job has to start out with the "it depends" concept, because what I would have said 3 weeks ago is ancient history. There's a publication, the Chronicle of Higher Education, and they had an article that came out at some point last month about this topic. And so much of it is completely out of date now. That's how rapidly we're moving. So what I say is based on today, but every time I wake up in the morning, I look at the headlines, I'm like, oh my goodness, look at this. We are living, in some ways, all of my experience in admission, in teaching, in writing, all this stuff is sort of not nearly as useful as it was a year ago. But at the same time, it's more important than it's ever been. Meaning that people are going to have to make a lot of very hard choices, both students this fall, who's going to show up? Are schools opening? How are they opening? And every school, public or private, has taken a major hit, just a major economic hit. People say, well, what about Harvard? Well, Harvard lost $2.5 billion 3 weeks ago. You think that's nothing? Yeah, they have a big endowment, but they're not emptying their endowment. They are trying to make do, but they are having huge budget cuts. What a lot of people don't know is the biggest debtor universities in the world are Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. Why? Because they have AAA bond ratings and they can borrow at low rates. So they do. They owe billions of dollars. The schools that are sort of junk bond status, they can't get loans. Even if you go down to AA, a lot of people don't realize that your bond rating is one of the more important things that US News goes into. Their rankings, if you're in the top 20 or so, you're going to have a AAA bond rating. So you can borrow money at least. but a lot of schools aren't in that category. And they're the ones I just predict they're going to be school closings for sure. How many and how quickly, that's remains to be seen. But there are schools that were already teetering on the brink. So that's an opening. I mean, I can talk about specific things.
Park, what's that going to mean for state schools versus private schools? What's going to happen to the state's budget in funding colleges versus private colleges that don't have that cash flow?
Well, in times of crisis, state schools always suffer because they have things they have to pay for, whether it's retirement funds or healthcare needs or, you know, police and, you know, the people, all of those things are non-negotiable. You have to have them. That's what the government has to provide. And that's what the federal government is telling them. You guys have to figure this out. Well, they're not going to have a choice because education is not, at least in college, a right. It's a privilege. Therefore, it's the thing that typically gets hit first because you're not going to cut back, if you can help it, on firefighters, policemen, and all sorts of other, you know, things that are valued to all the people in a state. So in 2008, when the economy crashed, everybody took a big hit, but that's going to look like kindergarten compared to, you know, postdoc in terms of how deep this is hitting. I mean, a month ago, schools were already saying they're going to lose 700 million. They're going to lose 120 million. They're going to lose, and that was a while ago. It's much worse than that now. And so it's hard to imagine, but everybody is getting called, you know, every department, including admission, is getting called in and called into the president's office or the budget office. And they're saying, so what'll you do with a 10% cut? What about 20? What about 30? What about 40? There may be some that are even higher than that. So everyone's getting hit. And in some cases, it's going to affect the admission office dramatically because that will cut down likely on travel. You know, can they travel and visit? Or even if they could, they can't because of COVID-19. Are they going to hire more people now that all these schools are going test optional? And, you know, it's going to be harder in some ways to distinguish? No. I mean, unless the school somehow manages to take money from others to hire more admissions readers, but they're going to be hiring not as many. You know, state schools are on, you know, they're on freeze right now, and so are many, many private schools, including the Ivies. So they're not hiring more people, even if they're saying they're more open to no tests. Well, then how is that going to work? That's my question. Mm-hmm. How do you give more time to the holistic review when you have fewer people? That's a good question. I don't know if schools are going to be able to answer that.
And they're going to have less data because in a lot of cases, they're not going to have the SAT or AC data, and they're not going to have second semester junior year for a lot of these kids because it's all pass fail. And we don't know what the first semester senior year is going to look at a high school. It could stay virtual.
Absolutely. So there are so many we don't know yet, but we have to back up a bit. Who's going to show up this fall? I mean, there are big issues about this. One is, you know, can people afford it? When they applied, they could afford it. Now they can't. Well, schools that have said that they are need blind, how are they going to deal with that? That's going to be a really interesting question. Schools that are going to go to their wait list, how are they going to deal with that? In other words, are they going to be taking full payers? Are they going to say they're taking full payers? That's as much as I'll say about that.
What about international students? That's a big contingent at some campuses.
It's a vital, it's keeping many schools afloat. And I think wrongly, because some of these schools are barely scraping by and they're not giving the education they should give for the money they're charging. Virtually all international students, with some exceptions, are not, they're all full payers. But currently, Chinese students can't come this fall because that's the law of the land in terms of getting student visas. So you're talking about losing hundreds of students at some schools who are full payers. That's millions and millions and millions, and not just to the school. You know, if you're in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I'm sitting right now, you know, all the businesses are closed, everything. It's really bad. Everything is suffering. The hotels, no graduation. That's Christmas, 4th of July, everything packed into one day. The hotels ramp up all their rates. You know, every restaurant, in some cases, you have to book a year ahead to get a reservation, and all that's gone. So it's not just the schools that are having major cutbacks, it's all the services. How many of these places will be able to reopen? So it is a world thing, but international students are the lifeline of some schools, and it's, no matter what, it's going to be millions and millions and millions of dollars of lost income to the community and the schools. And we don't know if China will even want them to go. If you were a parent, would you want to send your kid to the US right now? I mean, honestly, there's a lot of stuff going on here that's kind of scary.
So how is that going to affect admissions for a student who's applying for the class of who's graduating high school 2021? And how's it going to affect the class of 2022 if kids are taking gap years, and then it's going to be harder to get in possibly because there'll be less seats, or are there going to be as many seats as there were before? What's going to happen?
Great question. If I knew the answers, I'd give them to you, but I'll just say that I think gap years are great, you know, and I'd say that from personal experience. My daughter did a gap year, it changed her life in so many great ways. And there's so many uncertainties right now. And, you know, if schools are going to start in the fall, then you're already taking half a gap year. If all the classes, or for the most part, are all virtual, wouldn't you rather wait till they're real? You know, all these schools say they're opening, but there's a big asterisk. They can't have big introductory classes unless it's in a football stadium where there's, you know, 6 feet apart from people. It's just, you know, the lawyers at schools are risk averse. They're like, well, you know, no. And the schools are like, money. And, you know, so schools are going to open just like cities and states are opening, but I don't think they can, you know, are they liable? You know, if you let people in and then there's a big spike in cases at a school, should they get sued? Can the government say you can't sue a state entity? Really? I mean, these are all unanswerable questions, but gap years, schools say they take gap years. That's fine. But now they're going to get hammered with gap years. And what are they going to say? Well, we said that before, but no, you got to come. Well, they'll get sued on that. But how many spaces? I mean, I think people are more worried they're going to come in under their numbers this year because people are double and triple depositing. People can't get visas. People don't have the money anymore. You know, there are all these reasons why most schools, I think, will come in under their numbers unless now you're allowed through the NACAC changes in their guidelines to poach students from other schools. That happened this past fall. They passed that legislation to avoid a Department of Justice case. So now schools are going to be recruiting students who have already said they're going to another school. And maybe they're better schools in some way to what students are currently thinking of attending. So this is, I can go on, but I'll stop there. And
So Park, do you think demonstrated interest is going to play a bigger role now because they're concerned about, is that student really going to come, or the school saying, I really can't track demonstrated interest?
well, I think I mean, I've always said over the past 5 or 6 years, and not just people that work as consultants, but Jim Jump, who's, you know, the guy at St. Christopher's Forever, wrote and said he used to say, you know, when kids would come in, I don't know where I'm applying early, but I'm applying early somewhere. He hated that. Last year, he wrote a column and said, no, they're right, because it makes a huge difference already. You look at Penn, who's, you know, they take over half their class early. Duke, same thing. They're locking you in because they don't want you to then get in Cornell and turn them down or whatever. They want you signed and dotted on the line. Now, I would say everybody should look either early action, early decision. I think schools after this year, when their yields go way down, they're going to, you know, they're going to have long talks about how many are we going to take early this year. But, you know, it's 26% early decision applicants get into Penn versus 6% regular. You don't have to be a genius to say it's phenomenally different. And it's probably only going to be more so this year.
So what can a junior who's going to be a senior next year do to improve their chances? What could they do this summer to make themselves more viable, or even should they be evaluating colleges differently this summer?
Well, anyone that can create a vaccine can go wherever they want. I mean, people are limited in the summers. One of the things I've been advising a lot is Coursera and edX. Why? Because there are thousands of courses and they're taught by Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, you know, great hundreds, if not thousands of colleges around the world, thousands of courses. Now, this is going to be interesting in the next year. Students are getting credit for their own online courses this past semester that were created on the fly. Coursera and edX by a Harvard professor was planned like a year or two in advance. And they're not giving credit for those, but they are giving credit for their own online courses. And you know why? Because if they start giving credit, then people save, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars by taking those courses and getting a certificate. Their argument is that they don't have enough security to guarantee that the person taking it is. That's probably true, but there's going to be a lot of security issues when it comes to testing and APs and all this other stuff. But I think people should be taking Coursera courses because they're real courses from the best professors in the world. Why not? It's going to expand your knowledge base significantly. If it helps you get into college, great, but it's still going to help you learn stuff. You know, the traditional stuff, you know, going to some exotic place and doing service. You know, a lot of people don't like that to begin with, but every neighborhood needs help now. Every neighborhood. So you should be thinking about how to stay safe, but also how to give back. And that, you know, parents have to think about that. You know, what would we be comfortable allowing our son or daughter to do? You may be able to help online. You may be able to help, you know, local old people's homes in some ways, or daycare. There are just lots of things that need to be done around us. And it's certainly true where I live, and that's true just about everywhere.
You bring up one issue of giving back to the community. And I think every college says we value giving back to the community. But a lot of students and parents go, but why do you care? Why do colleges want students who give back to the community?
Well, I think there's been a large sea change in some ways about what giving back to the community means. 50 years ago, when the vast majority, well, let's say 70 years ago, when, you know, top 30 schools were virtually all white, mostly male, if not completely male, and your community was pretty homogenous by and large. So giving back to your community then meant, you know, you were in the same dining club, you were in the same this, that, and the other things. Now, in the last 20 years, the focus has been more on, no, what are you doing locally? You know, you don't just live in an island. You live in a community that's larger than the school. And that we want people, we need it more than ever. We're a more divided country than in any time in my lifetime by leaps and bounds. We need healing. We need a sense of, okay, I'm in this place with somebody whose political views are very different than mine, but we're here helping one another. And that's a good place to start, to bring us together rather than dividing us. So you know, it's not just good for us, it's good for the country. You know, the idea of patriotism now has become divided. You know, either you're on my side or you're the enemy. And that's compromise. You know, giving to the community means you got to learn to compromise, and we're not you know, it's like, you voted for that person, oh my God, you're a terrible person. Or you believe in that, you know, you're a terrible person. It's just, we're looking for reasons to get mad now. And I understand we're under a lot of stress. I get mad at stuff I shouldn't get mad at, but, you know, we got to come together.
So do you think that if a student does community service and takes a gap year, that's going to make them more desirable, and maybe they should apply to colleges that are more selective than they might have initially?
It depends. Because, you know, everyone wants a template. And I'm, you know, I always tell people, if you want a template, then lots of other people are going to do exactly what that template says you should do. that's probably not going to help you a whole lot. You know, the way I explain it is there are two doors in admission. Door number one is the group door, and door number two is the individual door. Group door, are you a state resident or not? You know, that makes a huge difference. Are you first generation? Are you underrepresented? Are you a recruited athlete? Are you a legacy? Are you? There are all these, you know, you can't just give a template and say, if you do a gap year, it's good and schools will look better. Sure, if you do something substantial, but it doesn't have to be dramatic. You know, if you put in hundreds of hours in a local community and helped people survive or help them die with dignity or whatever, help the families recover. Of course, that's a moving thing, but to say that's why you should do it, I'm really pretty skeptical about a lot of things. But I just can't go that far, you know, that it should be a cynical way of getting into college that you're going to help people. On the other hand, you know, we all join stuff because it might look good, and then all of a sudden it becomes our passion. So I'm not going to come right out and say never do it. I'm just saying keep an open mind. It's not, you know, going to college right now is low on the scale of what's going on in the world. You know, there are 20 million unemployed people in this country. There are going to be a lot more in the coming weeks. There's a lot that needs to be done, and getting out of your internal bubble. Oh my God, I'm applying to college. Well, this is what I say to people. You know how lucky you are to be stressed? You know, it's really, really lucky that you even have a chance of going to college, because most people don't. So stop your whining. And at the same time, I do, you know, kids are under more pressure now than ever. And they feel like they have all of these boxes they have to check. If the Common Application asks for 10 activities, they have to have 10 activities. That's stupid, but that's what they think.
So one thing that has come up historically is people ask, do colleges have budgets in terms of, are they going to take so many kids from one high school, so many kids from a different high school? There's a lot of different answers to that question, depending on who you ask. But how do you think that might change given the new environment we're in?
Well, again, it goes back to groups. The joke is, you know, if you're from a state with not many people, you have a much better chance of getting into a school than if you're in a, you know, Fairfax County, or you're in Westchester County in New York, or you're in wherever, you know, name your place. Because they want people, they want to be able to have on their profile, well, we have someone from, you know, South Dakota and Alaska and Hawaii and all of this. So that affects admission decisions. But then it gets more granular. Okay, how many people from your region? Because schools read regionally, and they also select students regionally, meaning how many are we taking from the Mid-Atlantic? How many are we taking from these are selective schools I'm talking about. Not that many care that much about it, but, you know, the top 50 or so, they care about this stuff. And it's not like the others don't care, but if you have the money and you're smart, you can get into most schools after a certain level. So there are, but then if there are 5 people from your high school applying to the same highly selective school, no matter how good you are, if you're number 5, unless you go to Andover, Exeter, you know, the usual suspects, but even Thomas Jefferson in Northern Virginia, arguably the best school in the United States, one of the best in the world, along with Stuyvesant. Harvard, Princeton, Yale won't take more than 10. Why? Because they don't. It's harder in some ways to get in from there than if you stay at your local school, which is why some people are pulling their students out from the really competitive school. Maggie Walker in Richmond, for example, it's a great school. And they always get kids in the top schools, but if it's a magnet school with a lot of supercharged kids, that's not necessarily an advantage unless you're at the top of the top, and then it's a huge advantage. Did that answer it?
Yeah, Park, that was great. We've come up to 30 minutes. Any closing comment you want to leave everybody with?
Relax. I mean, even if you take a year off, even if you don't get in the school that is at the top of your list, if you work hard, no matter where you go, you're going to have good options. So, you can make this whole process fun. That is what I tell students I work with. I'm all about fun. You're going to get to learn a lot about yourself. You don't get that much chance when you're out in the real world, but this year, probably more than most years, you're going to have a lot of time to self-reflect. And that's great, So take this as a great opportunity and don't focus on a select list of schools. And then it's a learning experience. And if you learn to know yourself, that's going to be a life-changing thing in a good way.
Excellent. Thank you, Park. We really appreciate you being part of our webinar and your insights as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Margaret, anything you want to add?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you all, and tune in next week. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Thanks for letting me be here.